Hey guys, it's Sunday afternoon, almost, but not quite, 1:15, and it is also the 3rd of March, 2024. Spring, at least according to the meteorology, um, is officially here. Two beginnings of spring. The meteorological um, spring comes on March 1st, precisely. And the astronomical spring comes on the equinox. Um, I like the fact that spring arrives in March, that being earlier. Of course, winter's done when winter's done. Seasons don't have boundaries um, in that regard. But I also like that equinox, the fact that the planets are aligned in such a specific way as to bring about spring like conditions, that the Earth is the proper distance from the sun in order for it to begin warming. Uh, Berdazzle is here, and she's saying hello. Hello, my friend. How are you? Um, and today certainly felt like spring. I was I did my early morning walk. It was not too cold. Um, I've mentioned before, my first walk is usually just around 5 o'clock in the morning, a little bit before, sometimes a little after. The point is to get out early for lots of different reasons. I want to avoid people. My hermit monk like nature calls for solitary excursions um, along the paths in my area. I'm not anti people, of course, but um, I really like that solitary time first thing in the morning, knowing that the path is mine and the animals that are stirring and the wind and the stars. The light isn't out yet. I'm getting that first hint of light, which is another reason why I'm out so early in the morning. And I talked about this probably incessantly, too often, I'm sure, that getting that first light, first sunlight to the eyes is all important to getting to sleep later at night. It is also just for your general health. Um, I have Google here, as I usually do, because when we talk, I like to Google things up. Let's do benefits. Of course, the first thing that comes up is the things that I talked about yesterday. And yesterday I talked about spinning in circles um, and the health benefits of spinning in circles. And there are surprisingly quite a few. Um, Specifically as children, it aids in our development psychologically, emotionally, neurologically, um, physiologically. But those results continue in our adulthood. But most of all, spinning, much like the Sufis, much like the dervishes, um, is of spiritual benefit. You can literally disappear within a spin. By that, I mean you see that you're this singular point of awareness and the world is turning around it. You're not the one turning anymore. There's just point of a complete, utter, motionless being still, and yet everything is spinning around and spinning around. It's an amazing experience. Um, work up to it. Start with, well, I do it in part of a program for the 5 Tibetan rites of rejuvenation, which is a Tibetan energy yoga practice that I do first thing in the morning. It has replaced my usual sun salutation with other yoga postures in my early morning practice, and of course, I still have my um, yoga practice later in the day. So, yeah, that was yesterday's topic, spinning in circles. Um, Highly recommend it. I highly recommend the 5 Tibetans. But even if you just spin, start off slow. 3, go for a couple of days, and then increase it to 7, and then do that for a couple of weeks, and then 14, and finally 21. No need to go over 21, um, really. at least according to the Tibetan yoga. It really is an amazing experience. And yes, you will get dizzy, but you get used to it. The trick is you're turning clockwise. Keep your finger focused. Keep your gaze focused on the middle finger as you, with your arms outstretched, and you're spinning in that circle. Today, back to my favorite topic of sunlight. What happens is that when that first light, and it can even be the ambient light of pre-dawn, when it hits the eyes, your body starts increasing production of cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine, which are stress hormones. Many of us are sort of conditioned to think that, well, we don't want to increase our stress hormones. In a natural way to get us started for the day, we do. Stress hormones in and of themselves aren't bad. It's the overproduction of stress hormones, as well as our inability to emotionally regulate what those hormones are doing to us. When we increase the stress hormones and we use it for a positive benefit, remember that evolutionarily speaking, I think I got that right, you wanted to increase that stress hormone because we were going to be chasing down a woolly mammoth or dodging or outrunning a saber-toothed tiger. We were going to be hunting and gathering, and as it's shown in some recent studies, we actually did more gathering than we did hunting. So for those who are following a Paleolithic diet, you might want to consider gathering more than hunting. That was the reason why we had that. We wanted to be in that parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous state. Sympathetic is the fight and flight nervous state that we evolved to have. When we need to fight or when we need to flee, it's invaluable to have. Unfortunately, we don't have to fight too often anymore, and we don't have to flee that often. But that stress response still happens, and it happens when we're in traffic jams or long lines, or a boss yells at us, or someone working for us is not doing their job right, or our kids misbehave, or our spouse yells at us. Whatever. We have that stress response. We don't have anything to do with it. We can't fight. We can't flee. So we raise our voice. We argue. We yell. We act inappropriately. When you learn to regulate that by pranayama, by breath work, you're offering yourself some emotional freedom. And I can't stress that enough, that when you're having a response of yelling at someone, of getting physical with someone, or threatening someone, you're not dominating anything. You're being dominated by your own sympathetic nervous state. You have no control. You're weak. If you learn to bring that down, now you have control. Now you have a choice. Now you're showing true strength. Remember, there's a difference between strength or power and force. With power being an innate quality that we can exhibit in times of need and stress. Power is the willow tree that bends in the breeze. Power is water that can literally, through a slow slide through the grass over a course of time, can carve out an actual canyon. That's power. Buddha had power. Jesus had power. Force is something different. Force is something that is used to coerce or overcome, break, but it doesn't last. And we're left empty because of it. Power always overcomes force without even trying. It's better to cultivate power than it is to exhibit force. And to cultivate power means that you learn to be quiet, you learn to be still, you learn to be responsive rather than reactive. You're no longer controlled by your physiological emotional response. You now have options. Um, so, but the important thing of producing those stress hormones early in the morning is that they die off through the course of the day, and in their raw material left over, your body produces melatonin and serotonin, which are the exactly what we need, the hormones that we need to help us get to sleep at night. So without that increase of stress production or stress hormones in the morning, we don't have the raw material to produce the right amount of the stress or the hormones to help us go to sleep. That's some of the importance of getting that first light to the eye, as well as the vitamin D production, serotonin boost. So even though that's another thing, hormones are always in balance naturally when we can help them, when we aid them. So when you get that cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine, it's balanced out by the boost of serotonin as well. Um, so you get better sleep patterns, enhanced memories and mood, enhanced mood and energy. Um, you begin to regulate your circadian rhythm. All important things of getting that first sunlight. So I like getting out early enough so that it's still dark, but it gradually gets light as I'm still out, and that early sunlight greets my eyes. Sleep-wise, it has been hugely beneficial for me. I can't think of too many practices that I've incorporated over the past several years that has had such a positive impact on my life. Um, Not to mention watching the world wake up, watching that sun come up and the sky light up is just a magical opportunity. I love starting my day early, knowing that even people who wake up early to go to work are still asleep, or still getting ready. And at that point, I've already gotten meditation and breath work in. I've already done my first round of yoga. I've had a cup of coffee, and I've written for an hour. And now I'm out walking. So, that is, I'm trying to figure out why I first began talking about waking up so early. And Googling. As I mentioned, yesterday's topic was spinning. I also wanted to talk about one of my favorite things is meditation. I mentioned that yesterday. I talked about meditation and breath work and yoga. Let's continue with yoga too. That in reply to my friend's request to talk a little bit, it is what it is, Lewis, who is here often visiting, what to do when things get serious, when the shit's about to hit the fan, when everything's going to go south, the collapse of society. And it's a worthy topic to talk about. But you know what I'd rather talk about? What can we do to prevent that from happening? We all pretty much assume that it's going to happen. I have no doubt that it might, but I'd still rather talk about what can we do to prevent it, because it falls on us, not just the government. What are we doing to reach out to, here's the thing, I was going to say to reach out to the other side. But what is the other side? Who is the other side? Why are we even taking sides? What are the sides about? I know there's a big issue over immigration, politically. And it's kind of ridiculous in a way, because our country literally built on immigration, legal and otherwise, and still runs. I remember when there was a protest several years ago in my area, and many of the immigrants legal or otherwise, stayed home, sort of a strike, and how eerily quiet it was. A lot of restaurants had to shut down for the day. There was no grass being mowed. There was all kinds of stuff that just wasn't getting done. I don't want to get political though. I don't have an answer for any of that, other than if you're a Christian, Google up the Bible and stranger. And the Bible gives explicit instructions on how to greet and live with the stranger, meaning someone from a foreign land. I'm not claiming that we're a Christian nation, but we do have a high percentage of Christians in our country. I don't consider myself a Christian. I'm a hybrid Yogi Buddhist. However, I do think there's some, for those who are Christians, you're given a way on how to respond to the present situation. Something to consider. For me, the path is yoga, and I like talking about the 8 limbs of yoga. More importantly, well, maybe not more importantly, I love talking about the foundation of yoga. As soon as you say yoga, people assume the physical aspects, the postures, asanas, but yoga is a complete path of transformation, which is perfect when we're looking at how do we avoid the collapse of society that people think is going to happen. How do we live our lives? How do we reach out towards others? Whenever I say something like that, how do we reach out to others? I'm always reminded of Ramana Maharishi's response when he was asked by a follower, how do I treat others? And he replied with a smile that there are no others. What if we thought that way? Not just thought that way. What if we truly believed that way? That's the path of yoga. So the foundation of yoga is the yamas and the niyamas. Yamas are the ethical restraints that we place upon ourselves. Yoga doesn't make any demands. There is no God saying, thou shalt not, and then giving us a list. What yoga does is gives us suggestions. And it says, do you want to transform yourself emotionally? Do you want to transform yourself spiritually? Do you want to be at peace? Do you want to be awakened and enlightened? Well then, try this. With the first of the yamas, there's 5 of them, being, and again, these are considered ethical restraints. They're restraints not because we are ceasing to eliminate anything from our life. They're restraints because the opposite is what grows. So the first of the yamas, ahimsa, which is non-harm, non-harming, non-harmfulness, often confused with pacifism. And yet there's absolutely nothing passive about practicing ahimsa, because it's an active, dynamic power that we activate simply by not harming ourselves, meaning that we take care of ourselves physically and emotionally, psychologically, physiologically, that we don't harm other beings, we don't harm each other. So we're practicing nonviolence, and nonviolence towards ourselves, and the nonviolence extends to thoughts. Do we have violent thoughts about ourselves? We don't mean harming ourselves, but do we ever stub our toe and then call ourselves stupid? Do we ever fail an exam and say, I can't believe how dumb I am? That's an act of violence against yourself. Do we do that same violence toward others? Do we go on YouTube and troll people, or Twitter/X, Facebook, whatever, just because someone has an opposite view on a political matter or religious matter or favorite movies, favorite songs, favorite artists, and do we go there and make sarcastic and snide comments about that person and their views? That's practicing violence against someone. How do we prevent the collapse of or societal collapse? Non-harming, practicing ahimsa is a wonderful start, because we begin to heal ourselves and we reach out and we help others heal as well. Not to mention, when you cultivate that sense of peace, as Patanjali talked about in the Yoga Sutras, of which the Eightfold Path of Yoga is inspired by, when you practice non-harm, when you practice ahimsa, you practice it deeply, you just have this aura of peacefulness about you, and it's easier to heal. It's easier to heal those emotional wounds that others have. People are drawn towards you. People are calmer. In the Transcendental Meditation movement, it is called the Maharishi effect, that by meditating deeply, by practicing ahimsa, you become an instrument of peace. Straight out of the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. One of my all-time favorite prayers. The second yama is satya, which is truthfulness. Again, you practice it with yourself. Are you lying to yourself? Do you delude yourself? Are you believing in conspiracy theories just for the sake of, I'm being controversial, I'm being edgy, that look what I believe that man didn't really land on the moon, I believe that Bill Gates was implanting people with microchips, that whatever. Are we telling ourselves the truth? Or are we just believing in stuff for the sake of believing? Are we telling the truth for others? And again, the restraint is put in place, not so much for us to avoid lying, but so that we're able to manifest a beautiful and peaceful world simply by saying that it's so. If we say it's so, it must be so. It must become so, because we are steeped in the practice of truthfulness. We don't speak things that aren't true. Therefore, it's much like when St. Francis saw the barren almond tree in winter, and he asked the almond tree, speak to me of God. And the almond tree blossomed in the middle of winter, revealed itself. The reason it did so, not because of this special spiritual power that St. Francis had, it was the power of truthfulness. Looking deeply within the tree, St. Francis could see spring was always eternal. Spring is as much part of life as winter is part of life, as autumn, as summer. So therefore, when you say, speak to me of God, God is revealed through every season. Just a metaphor, not scientific proof. Asteya is the third, and that means non-stealing. When we practice non-stealing, we're shown the abundance of the world, the abundance of life. We don't need to steal. Everything is here. Imagine if you didn't just practice this, that it was so deeply ingrained that you couldn't even consider stealing from another or stealing from yourself. And you know what? Stealing goes deep as well. If you are insulting someone, you're stealing their dignity. If you're insulting yourself in any way, you are stealing from yourself. All of these things need to be considered really, really deep. Brahmacharya is restraint. Some sort of liken it to celibacy, which could be part of the practice, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. What it is being mindful of your energy, the right use of energy. Sexual energy being one of the most potent forms of energy, so you want to be careful with that. Are you wasting it? Are you letting it, trying to be careful with what I say, I almost said dribble out. Mindful. Are you mindful of your sexual energy? Are you mindful of any of the energy that we experience as life itself? Apagaria, mispronounced Sanskrit, by the way, is non-greed, non-hoarding. Again, it's restraint to show us the opposite. We don't need to hoard when we live in an abundant world. So those are the 5 yamas, the first foundation of yoga. And then we have the niyamas, the second 5. These are personal observances. We have satya, which means cleanliness. Are we physically clean? Are we emotionally clean? Do we seek to live in a clean world? So again, it's not just washing the body, it's being mindful of our thoughts, being mindful of what we put out in the world. Santosha, which is contentment, cultivating that sense of being content with who I am, what I have, not always seeking, not always striving, not always needing more. Having more isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the attachment to having it causes greed. Tapas, discipline, austerity, burning enthusiasm is third. And having that in the right direction. Is our discipline serving us, or are we serving our discipline? It's an important question to ask. Sadvihara, again mispronouncing my Sanskrit, is the study of the self and sacred texts. Do you spend some time reading the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Dhammapada, the Bible, the Quran, whatever it is that inspires you? How about all of them? How about looking for a internal truth in all of those traditions? And the last is Vara Pranahana, which is surrendering to reality, surrendering to God, surrendering to life. Those are the 5 niyamas. That's the first 2 limbs of yoga, and it's considered the ethical path. If you're not practicing those 2, you're not really practicing yoga, you're stretching. Nothing the matter with stretching, nothing the matter with using yoga postures for stretching, but you're not doing yoga. You're using yoga poses to stretch. And then the third, pranayama, breath work, cultivating energy through the breath, cultivating the right energy through the breath. And then we have Brian Lane is here. Hey, Brian, how are you? I just watched your insane burpees not long ago. The 5 pumps, was it 5 pumps? And the lateral movement and the psycho style. And years of doing burpees, I've never tried the psycho style. No desire whatsoever. But I admire the people who do it. The 4th limb of yoga is the asanas that everyone's familiar with. The 6th is pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, meaning that instead of being so focused on the outer world, we begin to turn our focus and our concentration on our inner world. The 7th is one-pointed concentration. No, I'm sorry, that was the 6th. The 7th is the yama, which is the absorption in the object of our meditation. And the 8th is bliss consciousness, reaching that state of awakening, of enlightenment. If people dedicated themselves to yoga in that sense, we wouldn't have to worry about the collapse of society. We would be lifting society up with us. We would be living a beautiful and wonderful life. And I could take this same conversation and Google up Sermon of the Mount and say, if everyone lived according to the Sermon of the Mount, we would have an enlightened and awakened society. Brian says, I'm good, brother. Thanks for asking. How are you doing today? I'm doing pretty well too. It was a beautiful, it is a beautiful spring day. Definitely feels like spring. Which reminds me, I've been talking for half an hour now on yoga and all aspects of yoga, as well as the collapse, the societal collapse, and sleep hygiene. And it all started because I started talking about the beautiful day, the beautiful spring-like day that we're having, which just goes to show you how um, I have no control over over the topics that I talk about. It is wide-ranging, and it goes everywhere, and very often it goes everywhere at once. Um, One of the things, and Brian, I'm glad you're here. Um, I really do, I admire your burpee videos, but man, the videos when you're just being open and you're talking, or when you're showing nature, those are the ones that really strike me. That's really just absolutely beautiful for you to put out there. Um, and that's what I think when I go to your channel, that's what I think what it's all about. It's the art of Brian, which means it's all encompassing. It's not just burpees, but burpees are a big thing about it. It's not just nature, but nature's a big thing about it. It's you sharing your story. You know, the other day you did your free flow. Um, I love seeing people who are taking their channels in so many different ways, and it's been my goal for a while now. What I'm really trying to do is uh, present me, uh, however I, however I can, the expression of me, because we're all unique, divine expressions of life itself. We're all artists as well as the art form itself. So why not showcase it? Put it out there. Share it. Can you make a living doing that? Let's find out. That's what I'm certainly trying to do. I need very little to get by in life. If I can do that from a YouTube channel, as well as my blog, as well as teaching yoga and meditation. And by teaching yoga, I don't mean in studio showing people how to stretch. I mean coming here and talking about everything that I just talked about. Brian says, yeah, same nice day outside. I'm outside now. Yeah, I think we got up high 60s so far today. Brian says, I'm just a person who has ADHD, and I like a lot of different things, different topics. I do as well. And I mean, when you think about it, if you go out in nature, you don't just look at birds, you don't just look at trees or rocks or water. You look at nature, and nature is infinite in form. Nature is showing you everything at once. So to be just pinpointed and say, hey, there's nothing to matter with just having a burpees channel, but personally, I just like seeing things wide open. I like seeing the whole picture. How much can you put out there? Brian says, thanks, and also your channel is a wonderful art. I appreciate hearing that. Thanks a lot. So for some reason, when I was Googling this morning on something totally different, I don't know why it occurred to me, and Brian, you can help me with this. I Googled up, who's the greatest rapper of all time? I'm not huge in the rap. I appreciate it. Mocha, my ex-wife, loves 90s hip-hop. And it's funny, I know people born in the 90s who will say the same thing. 90s hip-hop. 90s hip-hop was where it was at. I know Paradox has said the same thing, as well as It Is What It Is, Lewis, but we never talked about who the greatest rapper was of all times. According to Wikipedia and Billboard, it is Jay-Z, which really surprised me, with Kendrick Lamar being second, Nas being third, Tupac being fourth. And I always thought Tupac would be considered the king of all hip hop. Um, and then a whole another thing, I mentioned king of hip hop. That comes up for Eminem, king of hip hop. I guess that's not too surprising. I still think of him as being relatively new, and yet it was 24 years ago when he came onto the scene thereabouts, and um, that's not, that was a long time ago, 24 years. Brian says, well, I love rap, but I don't always listen to it as much anymore because I don't always agree with the negative stuff that's shared. But sometimes I listen or just instrumental. I can understand that. Definitely with the negativity. We have to be careful. We have to be careful with what we take in, because what we take in is also what we give out. If you live on a diet of negativity, then you have a negative energy that you share with others. I'm not making a case of always being positive. Life is in flux constantly. It has a negative force, it has a positive force. And it's that coming together that's important. Too many times, if you focus just on the positive, you create the shadow, which is a powerful force, and when it's ignored, it takes over our life and we don't even realize it. The key is to realize that integration of the two, to integrate the positive and the negative. But again, you got to be careful of that subtle source of negativity that can enter into our lives. It's insipid and it brings us down. It takes away the positive. Everything is sort of lessened in that. My own, personally, I'd rather listen to jazz than almost anything. Jazz from 1950 to the early 1970s. I also like old country music, original country music, the Hank Williams country music, the George Jones, all the way up to Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash, Chris Christopherson. But and of course, I grew up on classic rock. That was the soundtrack of my youth. I literally followed the Grateful Dead for a decade of my life. I lived the hippie lifestyle even after the hippie lifestyle was pretty much over through the 1980s. Mac Miller, Brian says Mac Miller was one of the best rappers that really got me with such wonderful music, but he ended tragically. I actually haven't heard of him. I'm going to look him up. After I'm done going live, I'll YouTube him. Born in 92, deceased 2018. Weird that I hadn't even heard of him. I mean, again, I'm not huge into hip hop, but it is strange that I hadn't heard of him. Brian says, yeah, I like jazz or jazz hop or blues and some rock and oldies. Mocha loves sharing that without jazz, that hip hop owes its roots to jazz. You can hear it in some of the early beats, actually. to me, um, John Coltrane was channeling the divine. There's actually a chart of him standing next to a photo of him standing next to a mathematical chart where he um, is, it's almost like he's channeling divine through the mathematical structure of the notes that he's writing. Absolutely amazing. And of course, his album Love Supreme is an ode to God. If you've never listened to John Coltrane's Love Supreme, the entire album, Google it up and spend the next hour listening to it. And of course, I also love, for the same reason, classical music, because especially Bach, Brahms, it is the music of the spheres. It's the music of the angels, music of the gods. Brian says, oh, and I love Pink Floyd. Oh, you gotta love Pink Floyd. I regret I had several opportunities to see them in concert. From the early 80s, when they put out The Wall, I could have seen that tour. I never did see Pink Floyd. Because in the 80s, like I mentioned, I was too busy going to Dead shows. I did see some other great concerts, but Pink Floyd wasn't one of them. Brian says in classical, yes, 432 frequency, definitely. That's the whole tuning into those vibrations. And that's the important thing, circling back to what you said about the negativity. It's not so much the negativity itself, it's that frequency of negativity that brings us down. Brian says Led Zeppelin. Definitely, Led Zeppelin was for sure the soundtrack of my early teenage years. And I'm a huge Beatles fan. Spending a lot of years reading about the Beatles, always listening to the Beatles. They were just everywhere in my life growing up was all about the Beatles. Brian says his mom loves the Beatles, as well she should, because I'm sure that she is a very wise and beautiful person, and wise and beauty leads to deep appreciation of wisdom and beauty itself, and that's the Beatles. It was my early love of the Beatles that actually, and reading about them, that helped spark my interest in meditation, their involvement in the transcendental meditation, George Harrison leading a very deep and meaningful spiritual life. That did all of them. John Lennon had a tendency to embrace something and then reject it with almost a sense of violence to it. That he, let's see, I'm having a hard time. Even if I could read your name, I don't think I could pronounce your name. Delaney, you are old. And you are telling me that as if I'm not aware of my age. Yeah, I'm definitely, I'm going to be, next month, I'm going to be 59 years old. Brian says, I love music, period, from reggae to jazz, some country. It's just a good thing. Yeah, man, if you need to change your mood for any reason, in any direction, if you're sad and you want to charismate in your sadness, then play the blues. If you need to be lifted up, there is just so many avenues of doing so. For me, they lift up to that spiritual dimension. Nothing does it like classical music. So it's one of the things the whole basis of the talk that I've been having today is reaching out and lifting each other up in important ways that we better society for it. Which reminds me of the statement, "You are old." Was there a point to that other than stating the obvious? And probably the point was in some way to make me feel bad, to bring me down. The thing is that absolutely doesn't work, because I just can't bring myself to feel bad about myself because of what someone else had to say. To me, that would be ridiculous, absolutely, completely ridiculous, for me to feel bad over a comment, especially by a ghost in a machine. Someone, for all I know, doesn't even exist. However, little things like that are what we should seek to overcome if we want to live in a better world, a better society. Wouldn't that person feel much better about themselves putting out a little note of kindness to someone? Such as, "Hey, you don't look too bad for being really old." Or, "Hey, you can certainly do a whole lot of burpees for someone who's very old." You know, little things like that, take in consideration. If you want a better world, be better. That's the big message. That's the big message for today. With that, guys, we're going to end it. I'm going to do my second meditation session for the day. This has been an interesting conversation. It's gone all over the place, and it's been over 45 minutes, mainly me. As Brian was saying himself with ADHD, watch this conversation and you will see ADHD in action. Going everywhere. Brian says, "Yeah, you got that right." And Brian, thank you for that. That's the important thing of what you're doing. You're making the world a better place by putting your stuff out there. I appreciate that. I appreciate you being part of that movement. You had some things stacked against you, and you could have kept going in that direction. And through grace and will, you changed things around. So, good on you. You've done well, and you continue to do well. And it's impressive. And I'm happy to be part of that with you. So, Brian, have a good day. Anyone who tunes in, have a good day. Rosaria Delaney, and again, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. You have a good day as well. Thanks. Brian says, "You too," and everyone here. Thank you. I will see everyone later. Take care, guys.